How a CPU works. What is a CPU and what does it do? You probably use a CPU every day. But do you ever stop to think about what it's actually doing? It seems like such an easy concept, but the truth is that your computer's CPU does quite a lot under the hood to make sure everything works just right. Let's look at how this machine component works by breaking down its name into three components. Central Processing Unit. The first component, Central, refers to the fact that all of the data coming into and out of the CPU flows through one central place. Understanding what CPU do. A processor, also known as a central processing unit, CPU or microprocessor, is the brain of your computer. Its job is to process data as quickly as possible to give you the fastest performance. CPU are designed for specific purposes, so even though they are all called processors, they can be drastically different from one another. For example, if you have an Intel Core i7 8700K that's made for gaming, it will perform differently than an Intel Core i5 2500K that's made for productivity tasks like word processing or web browsing. Different types of CPU. There are two major types of CPU. The first, the Central Processing Unit. CPU is what's known as the brain of a computer. It's responsible for interpreting instructions from applications, running those instructions to completion, and then sending the results back to the application. The second type of CPU, known as Graphics Processing Unit, GPU, handles things like graphics rendering in order to produce images that you see on your screen. The term CPU technically refers only to the brain of a computer, but often people will refer to both types as a CPU. Main parts of a CPU, a Central Processing Unit, or CPU, is a type of microchip that functions as the brain of your computer. There are three major components to any computer: the input/output devices, such as the keyboard and mouse, the CPU, and the memory or RAM. The input/output devices are what you use to control your computer typing on a keyboard, clicking with a mouse. When you use these input devices, you are communicating with your computer. The job of the CPU is to process that communication by reading what's been typed in or clicked on. Intel processors explain. An Intel processor consists of two major parts: the microprocessor, which executes instructions which are stored in memory, and the motherboard, which governs how the processor communicates with other components. The microprocessor has four elements that work together to execute instructions. Control unit checks for instruction errors and makes sure instructions are executed correctly. Arithmetic logic unit handles all arithmetic computations. Cache stores data so that frequently used data can be accessed quickly by the control unit. Bus interface connects the microprocessor to memory, input/output devices, or other components in order to allow them to communicate with one another. AMD processors explain. AMD processors are built on the x86-64 architecture. This means that they have 64-bit extensions built into them, which will allow them to execute more than 4 billion instructions in parallel. It also means that they can support up to 16 simultaneous threads of execution. In contrast, Intel processors are only able to execute 8 threads at once, making AMD processors better suited for heavy multitasking needs. AMD also uses an instruction set that is backwards compatible with their older processors, meaning that if you purchase a new computer with an AMD processor, you won't have any issues installing an old program from years ago. Now you know how a CPU works. The operation of the CPU is complicated and very technical, but with this video we have understood what they are for, the differences between the various models, and why they are considered the brain of every modern computer. See you next video.